our doors. So we're a pretty new brewery, which in Hampton Roads means anybody that's been around for 5 years or less is a new brewery. In the last couple of years, Hampton Roads has exploded from 4 craft breweries to currently 25, soon to be 28. So it gives you an idea of how much this is blowing up down here. And that's from Williamsburg down to the beach. So we all get along. We get that question a lot. We call each other up and talk all the time. We do judge you by the beer that you drink, so that's the way it goes. Sometimes the beer shirt you're wearing as well. So tradition started out, like I said, we started out planning the brewery about 5 years ago. And it was an idea in my head about 10 years ago. So it takes a little time to get a brewery open. And a lot of people ask me what I think about them opening a brewery, and I personally don't care, but it's your life. If you want to not ever see your family again or never see your dog, it's a perfect life. I'm kidding. It's great. Our brewing process for these beers that you're about to try, the first beer you'll try that's coming around is Sounder. And Sounder's the beer that started it all. It's an American pale ale. Growing up in Colorado, as craft beer kind of epicentered in Colorado and California about the same time, this is the craft beer that I grew up on. Other than my next door neighbor who worked at Coors, and we used to sneak beer out of that fridge all the time, starting at, well, I went to we learned to shotgun beers in Colorado for free. Anyhow, so the Sounder that you're trying now, it's an American pale ale with my own little bent. It's the difference between a pale ale and an IPA is not a whole lot. It's really the IBUs and what we call the international bitterness units. That's the bitterness you get in your mouth that you taste in the beer. The palate. The American palate can only handle, and even the European palate, can only handle about 90 IBUs. So anything over that, you're really not tasting. Your tongue kind of kicks out about 90. That's your bitterness level. And when you see a beer with 100 IBUs or something like that, what you're starting to get at that point over that is more of an aroma. So we build a beer and we bitter a beer. The first palate that we get, we'll only take it up to about 60 IBUs. And the rest of those IBUs that kind of float in at the end are really what we do with the aroma and things like that. So we try and keep it anyhow. So Sounder started it all. Our process starts with us sourcing grains and hops from all over the country. We're very particular about if we're going to brew a German-style beer that we get those grains and we get those hops from Germany and that region in Germany if possible. So our Oktoberfest, all our grains, all our hops, and our yeast are all German grains, hops, and yeast. Okay. When we do an alt beer, which means old in German, it's the oldest beer in Germany, as a matter of fact, and it comes from northern Germany. It's a very dark, very malty beer, but we source all those grains and all those hops and all the yeast from that region in Germany. Our Pilsner, or our Czech Pilsner, same thing. Everything's sourced from that region. Ironically, a lot of Czechoslovakian grains actually come from Germany, so that's the way it is. A little known fact, or maybe you do, the Czech Pilsner was actually designed by a German brewer. Czech Pils are a great beer. It's a great entry-level craft beer. Most people don't even realize it. Pilsen at the time in Czechoslovakia, we're talking, the mid 1800s, had terrible beer. So much so that the citizens of the city banded together and they broke all the casks open in the street in front of the city hall to protest the beer that was being served to them. Because in Czechoslovakia, in a lot of these Germanic towns and these Czechoslovakian towns, the brewery was owned by the city. So if you had bad beer, it was upon the mayor, the governor, or whoever the brewmeister was to take the heat. So they broke all the casks open, and Czechoslovakia decided, one, we're going to build a new brewery, and two, they're going to get a different brewer. So they brought a brewer over from Munich that had learned to brew very light beers. In Germany at that time, they're still brewing very dense Oktoberfest style beers, very Marzen style beers. This guy started to brew a lighter beer. and they brought in Czechoslovakia, and the result was the Czech Pils, which we love today, and just led to the Budweisers and the Miller Coors, and all those beers, the Czech Pils beers. So, it's a little history for you. So anyhow, I sidebar like that all the time, for warning. So yeah, we source our grains and our hops from all over the world, and we use those in the different style beers that we have. The two beers that you're trying today, the Sounder and the other one that's coming out, the Red Willie that they're pouring for you now. Red Willie is a Northern Irish red. Irish reds are indicative to Ireland, and there's two styles. One, you'll get the Southern style, which has a very creamy flavor to it, and also that's very indicative to the Southern style stout in Ireland. So if you get like a Smith's or something like that, you get that more creaminess in the beer. The farther north you go, the more bitter it gets, and that's due to the grain and the yeast and the hops that they use. Okay, so this is a Northern style Irish red. This comes from more of the industrial versus the agricultural region of Ireland. This is where the Titanic was built. This is where a lot of the major fishing fleets come in and out of. This is the shipping industry of Ireland. And the beers tend to be a little darker, a little heavier, a little denser due to the region of the hops and the grains that they use. So this Irish red that you get, you still get that little maltiness and that little sweetness that's indicative to an Irish red, but what you really get is a more, what I get more like a spicy profile, and that comes from the style of hop that they use up there. So, a little bit. So if you get an Irish red and one tastes creamy, you're pretty sure that that thing came from Southern Ireland. If it's a little darker, heavier, and spicier, that's a Northern Irish. If you look at, say, Guinness, that's the Guinness actually started out as a porter plant back when they opened, and as the stout gained popularity, they turned themselves into what now is one of the most famous beers in the world. But if you taste it, it has a much more bitter profile than, say, cream stout, which is more indicative to the southern part of Ireland. So you can always tell the difference that way. That's really the only country you can tell the difference in. So yeah, these two beers are the most popular. You'll find these in most restaurants. We also brew 36 other different beers on our pallet. Right now, we typically only keep 8 to 12 on at a time. That way, you know, you can do 2 flights and be happy. We do everything from lagers down to ales. We do oyster stouts, Irish stouts, cream stouts, oatmeal stouts. We do a lot of stouts. We also brew 2 different IPAs, soon to be a 3rd IPA coming out. We are constantly evaluating different style of hops every time. Right now we're looking at some small hop growers out in California that are making a hop that has a high lemon value to it, or a very lemony taste to it. And we're getting ready to pair that into a very Pilsner style base to bring a very bright, refreshing IPA to you next summer. So that'll be something new, a fully filtered, light-bodied IPA. So our main focus as a brewery is to brew things that are traditionally brewed. So when we brew an an Oktoberfest, or we brew a Marzen, or we brew a double bock, we do what's commonly done in the German breweries. We will do a decoction. We will take part of the mash off, we'll boil it, we'll put it back in to keep it as true to style as possible. The whole process really starts, you know, with the grain selection, and we're very passionate about what we do. We taste the grain. Every batch that comes in, we split the bag, we open it up, we taste the grain, we run it through the lab to make sure it meets our standards, and then we'll open up the recipe. Most recipes that we brew with start around 1,200 pounds of grain, go up to 1,600 pounds for our oatmeal stout, which is a lot of grain, and that's a 20-barrel batch, which equals at roughly 600 gallons of beer. So we're using up to 1,600 pounds of grain for 600 gallons of beer, which is a pretty heavy bill. And once we choose our malts and we go ahead and mill it, and when we mill, you're not turning the malt into a powder, we're actually just breaking it open. We're trying to get to the endosperm, or the seed that's inside that thing, because that's what we're after, the sugar. We bring it into the grist mill, the big case that you see where you mix the water and the grain together. We typically let that steep somewhere around 150 degrees, depending on the style that we're making. It can be a little bit less, it can be a little bit more. It can be multiple steps throughout the process. And that hot water is taking the starch and it's breaking it down into simple sugars. And we need those simple sugars for the yeast to convert into alcohol. So this whole long process, essentially all we're doing is making sugar water that we're going to give it to the yeast. The yeast are going to eat it. They're going to give us CO2 and they're going to give us ethyl alcohol. And the ethyl alcohol is what we're all after in the beer. And some flavor. So once we break it down in the kettle, that only takes about an hour to an hour and a half on average. Some beers might be a little bit longer. We take more hot water, we're rinsing that grain out, and we're taking every ounce of sugar in there. We take readings called specific gravity. Specific gravity is just measuring the density of a liquid. And when we use it in the brewing process, we're measuring the sugar that's in that water. When we're done mashing, we're in the original conversion of the starch. We get a value of somewhere around 1.080 in the specific gravities. Plato, we're talking about 1065 or 6570. Okay. That tells us how dense the sugar is. When we're done rinsing all that grain out and we take a final reading of the water, the wort that's coming out of there, we've taken that reading down to what's called 1.005. So we've rinsed almost completely all the sugar out of that thing. And we've collected about 750 gallons of what we call wort to this part. We take that wort and we boil it. And we actually turn the steam jackets on as we're transferring. By the time we're done transferring all this wort, which takes about an hour, we're already at a boil of about 212 to 213 degrees. So we're boiling 700 gallons in an hour. If you measure how long it takes you to boil a pot of water on your stove, a gallon of water on your stove, and do that conversion, it's pretty neat how fast this actually happens. We're a steam powered brew house, so we can really hammer things home. Inside that kettle, we're doing three things. We're sanitizing the beer, we're sterilizing it so the wort has a nice clean food to eat and no contaminants are in it. We're using the hot water and the hops, and when we put hops in and the hot water hits it, it takes all those acids and it opens them up and infuses it into the beer. It happens very quickly. Once we open the hop bag and pour it in there, we only have a few minutes before some of those vapors and the acids will start to evaporate out of the hops. So you want to do it very quickly and get it into the beer and out into the air around you. And we do that at various sections throughout the brewing process. The first time we bitter a beer with hops, at first edition, is that bitterness that you're getting in the beer, that was from the very first edition of the hops that you're tasting. That's the very first boil. And then over time we add different layers of hops to get different hop profiles and different tastes and flavors and aromas in the beer. The aroma that you get from hops in a beer is the very last, typically the very last hop addition. Okay? So we boil it, and the third thing we're doing is we're condensing it. We're taking those flavors just like if you were making a sauce on your stove and condensing it down. You're making it richer, you're making a better palate out of it. And this is a theme that occurs all through the beer as we're aging it. Okay? Once we've done boiling it, we whirlpool it to take all that junk that's in the beer, and we put a big cone in the center, and we pull the clear beer off. And we run it through our chiller. And our chiller will take that beer that's about 212 to 213 degrees and chill it down to 55 to 65 degrees in about a minute and a half, just using 50-degree water. These are all those physics classes and chemistry classes we slept through in high school that I have written countless thank you letters about, apologizing for me messing around in class. Okay. Once we do that, we're sending it down to a fermenter, and inside that fermenter is where we're adding the yeast. Okay? And the yeast is going to take all that sugar, and they're going to consume it, and they're going to give us the alcohol, and we're off-gassing the CO2. And it takes somewhere between 10 to 14 days on average for most of our beers to ferment. These are all our ales. A lager, say like an Oktoberfest or a Czech Pilsner we talked about before, will take 30 days on the average to come down to the specific gravity that we want. Okay? We pull the yeast off, we put it into a container, and we recycle it for further use. We can use a colony of yeast up to almost 7 times before we have to replenish that colony or regrow a new colony of yeast. We'll run the beer through a filter, so we make it nice and bright. And then we'll run it to what's also called a bright tank. And a bright tank is the final stage of maturation in the brewing process. We'll hold it in there for a few days. It's It's kind of like when you make a marinara sauce or spaghetti sauce and you let it sit for another day. It's always better the next day. Beer's kind of the same way. We're going to let it sit in there for about 48 to 72 hours, and it's going to kind of gel together, and the flavors are going to become richer and more pronounced. And then we're going to inject CO2 into it, and we're going to carbonate a big 40-barrel batch, which is somewhere around 1,200 gallons of beer in a little under 8 hours. And then we'll let that sit for 24 hours, and then we'll cake it. So the entire process, start to finish, is somewhere around 25 days. Once we cake it, it actually sits for another week to let it mature and stabilize, and then it goes out to distribution or out to our hospitality room that we have in the brewery. So start to finish, about 30 days for an ale, anywhere from 60 to 90 days for a lager. So our Oktoberfest, our Czech Pilsners, our Marzens, our Mexican lager that's out right now. All these beers took anywhere from 60 to 90 days to produce. So that kind of gives you an idea of what goes into the beer. The brew day alone starts at 5 in the morning, and when we're double batching, ends somewhere around 5 in the afternoon. By the time we're done cleaning up and out the door. So that's the basic process of beer. It sounds easy, and it really is. Brewing is simple. It started 5,000 years ago in clay pots. Okay, you can imagine the first discovery of beer. I always like to think of some hunter-gatherer in the Mesopotamian region, as northern Mesopotamia, coming in from gathering his grains that he's been storing in a pot, and overnight it rained. And he didn't do anything about it. He's just got a messed up pot of grain. And he goes off hunting and gathering again. He comes back a week later, and this thing's bubbling and fermenting like crazy. Now, when you think back to that time, anything bubbling and fermenting is anything natural. So he drinks it, and he gets a nice warm fuzzy feeling after a really long day of gathering, sticking, pulling grains out of the ground. There's the beginning of civilization as we know it. Now this guy has figured out that if you put grain in a pot, you ferment it, you get this really great drink that gets you through the next day and the next day and the next day. Now you start to see people cultivating fields. You start to see people living together in communities. You see farming and agriculture start to arrive. You see transportation start to come. You see commerce and trade start to grow. You see bread making, you see wine making, because they suddenly figure out if beer does this, what else does this? You see mead come out, you see grapes being grown and fermented and various other things in the advent of liquor. So from this point on, civilization starts to move very rapidly. And we like to, you're welcome. We like to say, that beer was civilization and civilization was beer. And it really is when you think about it. We're talking about refrigeration, we're talking about railroads and transportation, we're talking about monopolies, the first monopolies of the Catholic Church and the monasteries getting together and banding together and controlling the beer trade in Europe. So really a lot of how we are today stems from that first guy drinking that first pot of what had been something pretty foul tasting but made him happy. So and that's how we get here today. So any questions?
All right. How did you get your education?
How did I get my education? Yeah, this is actually a funny story. About 25 years ago, I started home brewing. And it all happened as I was dating this lady, and she was into cake decorating. And I walked in with her to Tidewater Cake and Supply down in Norfolk. And she was buying cake pans, and there was, look, for a guy, that's entirely too much lace and really running around in that place. In the back room was this home brewing and wine section. So I wander off into the back checking this thing out. She walks out with $10 worth of cake pans, and I walk out with about $200, $250 worth of home brew. And that's literally where the downhill slide started. The first batch, it was horrible. I'm not gonna lie. It was like we bought probably one of this at paint store. It was god. But I stuck with it, and we kept refining the best recipe and refining the recipe. Sounder was that recipe. That was 25 years in development off and on. So that's where that came from. When I started to become serious about opening a brewery about 10 years ago, I started looking at education. 10 years ago, there was not a lot of education available. There was UC Davis, which meant you had to move to California. Siebel in in Chicago, which is Siebel is a satellite campus from the main breweries in Germany. It's a seed facility to train brewers to go to Europe. And then there was a couple other places. Portland University had some classes in brewery management because that's about the time craft really started to blow up in the West Coast. So I ended up attending Siebel and getting my master's from Siebel. I still haven't finished my master's, so I have to go to Germany and to Belgium for 4 weeks, which, darn. But because we opened the brewery about that time, I have not been able to finish that. So I'm still waiting to go, hopefully very soon. So now there are more opportunities out there, and more universities are offering courses in brewing. But I'll say this, if you're interested in brewing, the very first thing you should do is check out YouTube, see how it's done. You'll get yourself a 1-gallon home brewing kit and start with that. Because 1 gallon you can do it in your stove, you make basically 2 6-packs out of beer, and very low cost. We're talking like 50, 60 bucks. Okay. Then if you're interested, then you can start spending the thousands of dollars and getting yourself in all kinds of trouble with your spouse. Trust me, a lot of trouble. So, and then if you're really interested past that, then I'd say go ahead and look at getting it. Okay. Breweries are still very much tradesmen's organizations. It's still very much an apprentice-style program, so if you're interested and you've been homebrewing for a while and you want to get into a brewery, a lot of times we'll have days where you can come in and help us out and kind of get a feel of what it's like. You'll come in at 5 in the morning, you'll hump the sacks of grain, you'll get up, you'll help pitch the yeast, you'll help pull the hoses, you'll help clean up, and it's a really nice introductory into a career that, although it's a lot of hard work, people leaving a desk job and going to work for a brewery, it's almost like shell shock. It's very labor intensive. You spend a lot of hours in there. My average work week is 65 to 70 hours inside the brewery. There are some weeks that but mostly it's a lot of heavy lifting. But that end product, when you can walk out and you see people like yourself enjoying the beer, and you make something that's fun, you have your pretty much your own boss for the most part. It's a really great lifestyle, and I have no problem with more people trying to jump in. Business plans are not easy, breweries are not easy to open, and breweries are not easy to run. But if you're really interested and you have that entrepreneurial spirit, I highly recommend it. Yeah, not a problem. Vineyards and whiskeys as well. They're all open right now, and it's a great place to live. But once again, back to your question, education, there's so many, Virginia Tech now is starting out, which is great, and I expect to see probably one of the local colleges, I can't remember which one, is looking to advance as well. So I know Thomas Nelson is something that we've been partnering with to kind of help develop that in a couple of years. So, see some